All right. Today, now we shift to the discussion of boundary layers. When we talk about flow path solids, we know that there is a no slip condition at the solid surface, and that's true in a vast majority of cases. So, while you will be safe to presume the no slip condition at solid surfaces in overwhelming number of occurrences in practice, you may do well to remember that there could be possible exceptions, especially with the advent of new materials nanotechnologically tailored. It might be possible to achieve a partial slip at the solid surface, but you need really special techniques, and this would happen in only artificial examples in laboratory, unlikely to be met in practice. But for the sake of complete understanding, it should be remembered that it's possible that there may be exceptional deviations from the no slip condition. Super hydrophobic surfaces are examples. So, it's possible to create surfaces which will be completely hydrophobic, and if you were to talk in terms of contact angle, approaching 180 degrees might not be impossible today. But returning back to the classical and majority of cases, we do have at solid surfaces the velocity equal to 0, and at fluid interfaces velocity may not be 0. Okay. Now, we come to this example which is familiar to you. I am certain that this has been looked at in the transport phenomena course. Consider a fluid with a uniform velocity coming in contact with a horizontal planar slab, which could be regarded as infinite in extent, and the free stream velocity or incident velocity is uniform at u0. And then this fluid with uniform velocity suddenly comes in contact with this solid plate, and for the sake of simplicity, we only look at the top surface. So, let us look at a rough diagram of what we have. The fluid is coming with uniform velocity u0, and this is the top surface of the solid horizontal planar slab, large in extent, and we see that this free stream velocity, as soon as the leading edge starting at A comes in contact with the fluid, will be brought to 0. And then if we were to move away in perpendicular direction, you would find that the velocity will approach u0. Here at this point of incidence immediately, later the uniform u0 velocity is obtained at greater and greater perpendicular distances. So, our horizontal surface is AK. We may choose to represent our coordinate system such that x is measured along the surface from the leading edge, z is measured perpendicular. And while we begin with this fluid mechanical example, we at once take into account possibility of mass transfer and even heat transfer accompanying the momentum transfer. So, apart from the velocity, we have to talk of the concentration and temperature. So, let it be Ca 0 at the plane of incidence, and let us say temperature is some T0, and if the heat and mass transfer is also occurring between the solid surface and the plate, we should likewise be able to think of variation in concentration and temperature. At the leading edge or just before that, the concentration is uniform, temperature is uniform, velocity is uniform, everything is uniform. Over here, we will see variation in perpendicular direction. Now, in order to accommodate the physical picture in the span of this slide, I have made it not to proportion. So, you would see probably this whole boundary layer part, everything is squashed in this direction. actual variation would be much more gradual, as I had shown you in the pictures over here. That's more likely to happen. Very gradually the variations would happen. Here we come across the first task of defining the extent of the boundary layer. The layer of fluid immediately next to the solid is stationary, and as we go in this direction, you would find the velocities are smaller than the free stream velocity u0. Eventually, if you go to large distances, we will hit the region of uniform velocity u0. So, we could conceptually think of dividing this entire space into two regions, one which is slower moving compared to the free stream velocity, and the other which corresponds to conditions over here before the solid came in contact. This, however, doesn't solve our problem completely. Question is, how do we distinguish this slower moving fluid in comparison to the free stream conditions? If one were to measure sensitively the velocities, we probably would not be able to identify practically where exactly we could define the boundary or extremity of this slower moving fluid. So, here we had to think of some mathematical condition or criterion in terms of which we define the extent of boundary layer. We may have to take into account the sensitivity or accuracy of your measurement, the least count of your measurement, let us say of velocity. So, the conventional way of stipulating this is to say that we will call that region which represents the envelope of 0.99 times the free stream velocity. We will, and this is arbitrary, okay, this is only a convention. We just say that if the velocity is equal to or less than 99% of free stream velocity, then we will call it a slower moving region. So, it turns out to be something like this. In reality, much more expanded in x direction. That is the envelope at which the velocity is 99% the free stream velocity. And you see now this slower moving region is greater in extent as we go in the direction of k. It is here that we have to also take into account the fact that should we be able to write the equations for transport, for momentum transfer, and then for mass and heat transfer, for which I have to explain a few things more, we might want to represent our formulation in dimensionless terms. I bring out one more time the importance of dimensionless representation, especially when it comes to numerical simulations. The dimensionless representation offers a certain universal character to representation. Imagine if you were to think of the pressure drop, flow rate, tube diameters, different roughnesses, different fluids, so their properties, etc., all together, how many graphical representation, how many graphs would you require to represent all the data? However, if you take a recourse to dimensionless representation, it boils down to that universal curve f versus Re, which takes into account all kinds of circumstances. So, there is a definite advantage that we see large bodies of data could be compactly represented in dimensionless fashion. It also gives one advantage, it brings out the pertinent parameters in dimensionless groups which are fewer in number compared to the original number of parameters and variables. So, there is a convenience in the representation and understanding of our data in dimensionless form. It also offers certain insights which broadly I would say are overrated, useful but overrated, and dimensionless groups permit obtaining empirical correlations which are practically useful. Of late, in the last decade or so, there are divergent views about this and about more classical ideas we may have chance to talk about later. But dimensionless representation is certainly worthwhile. In the context of numerical computations, if you happen to do any research involving numerical solutions, numerical computation simulations, you would find that it would be a great advantage to render your formulation or equations in dimensionless form, because there comes another big advantage in computations themselves. Maybe I will take a minute to highlight that. Imagine that you are solving a system of differential equations, let us say ordinary differential equations, in which one of the variables varies gradually. All the variations that you encounter in that variable, dependent variable, are gradual. But in a couple system, a certain other dependent variable connected to this has a very sharp variation. If you deal with such systems of differential equations, ordinary differential equations, in which rates of variations are very, very different, then you can expect invariably that you will run into difficulties if you were to attempt the usual numerical simulation schemes. When you deal with such very different derivative values, we call that system of equations as stiff differential equations. The usual algorithms like Runge-Kutta method, fourth order Runge-Kutta method, or predictor corrector method, etc., not to talk of Euler method, which is prone to error, you would run into trouble. You won't be able to solve that kind of system of equations. Okay. And if you were non-dimensionalized equations, your degree of difficulty will be even higher. So, to make your calculations, computations, and to organize them into a compact systematic fashion, first step advised in numerical solution of any model is go for non-dimensionalization. Identify the dimensionless groups, and then the task of generating numbers and representing these universal relationships will get easier. Interpretation also gets easier. That is a completely different kind of advantage you get in the solution terms. Okay. So, one has to go for non-dimensional representation. But I return back now to the heat and mass transfer problem. I have to first talk about this a little bit here. This purple line is the envelope which is defining the boundary layer for momentum. That is the region where the velocities are at least 1% lower than the free stream velocity. Okay. And then you see, you define the Reynolds number here based on a length scale, which is the distance measured from the leading edge, which is this point A. The x measured from A is taken in the Reynolds number. So, Reynolds number will be x u rho by mu. Okay. And as you see, as you go downstream, you will get larger and larger Reynolds number values. And as expected, the flow gets destabilized and goes through a certain fluctuations, random fluctuations, where eddies become more predominant. Eventually, you reach the transition zone and finally the turbulent zone. So, it is here that I would like you to see that this is the laminar part of boundary layer, then we have a transition zone, and then we have the turbulent boundary. Okay. Something more about momentum transfer. Even in the fully developed turbulent boundary layer, you have a certain region where the viscous mechanism predominates. So, we have viscous sublayer. The region under Fg will be a viscous sublayer. You can now also think of the concentration variation, and we will go by this presupposition that the uniform concentration CA0 happens to vary near the solid. And why would it vary? Either the fluid is losing the solute to the wall, or it is acquiring solute from the wall. So, more in tune with what we have been talking about in the last problem, which was the Graves-Nussel theory, if this wall has a soluble component and this solute A dissolves here, the concentration at the interface would be raised to a value higher than Ca0, and in particular, if we were to neglect the dynamics in this entire steady state picture, the concentration will be CAI or saturation concentration. Saturation concentration is higher than Ca0, so A will be transferred in this direction from the solute wall surface to the bulk of liquid. So, the concentration will vary somewhat like this. Far away from the solid, the concentration is like at infinity in the case of the element of a penetration or surface renewal model, or in the short time of contact as in the falling film case. Far away from the surface, the concentration is uniform, but here the concentration is higher, and then one may again say likewise that the region where the concentration exceeds the free stream concentration by at least 1%, that will be defining the concentration boundary layer. So, if this is the profile, around this point the concentration is maybe 1.01 times Ca0, and that is the boundary of the concentration boundary layer. So, concentration boundary layer you see is contained here within the momentum boundary layer. In particular, if you come to the numbers, it was in context of a pipe flow. Ignoring curvature, you have an analogous situation. The momentum boundary layer was representative, having representative value about 82 microns, and the concentration boundary layer had a thickness about 8 microns. So, again this is not up to scale. Somewhere in this region, the momentum boundary layer is much fatter than the concentration boundary layer, okay? Maybe 10 times, and that is anticipated by that relation delta C by delta, where delta is the concentration boundary layer, where delta is the momentum boundary layer. Delta C by delta will be proportional to Schmidt to the power minus 1 by 3. Schmidt is large, so that is a small number. Schmidt to the power minus 1 by 3 is a small number. Delta C by delta is a small number. Likewise, you could think of heat being transferred from this plate to the fluid. If the temperature of the surface is greater than uniform temperature of the stream T0, then heat will be transferred from the plate towards the bulk of the solid. So, you will have similar profile for temperature. Once again, you may say that that point where the temperature is 1.01 times the free stream temperature, that is the extent of the temperature boundary layer. It turns out, because Prandtl number is now intermediate, smaller than Schmidt number, delta T by delta will be proportional to Prandtl to the power minus 1 by 3. Prandtl is smaller than Schmidt. So, the temperature boundary layer is intermediate between the momentum boundary layer and the concentration boundary layer. Okay. Once again, we come to the same realization that you get more location, greater extent in space to make measurements on temperature. So, the degree of difficulty of measuring temperature profile and therefore getting the AD diffusivity for heat or thermal AD diffusivity is intermediate between the AD momentum diffusivity measurement and the mass diffusivity, mass AD diffusivity. Okay. So much was the physical picture and insights into it. So, delta C will be represented by this small delta C. Delta is the momentum boundary layer thickness will be, or delta U is the momentum boundary layer thickness. Delta T will be the concentration. Delta T will be temperature or thermal boundary layer thickness. This region, even within the turbulent flow, fully developed boundary layer, the region close to the wall, we have this viscous sublayer where the viscosity dominates. Okay. That is always going to be present no matter what the turbulent conditions are. It could be smaller if the turbulent conditions are more intense. Okay. Where does the boundary layer become turbulent? The boundary layer becomes turbulent when Rex defined based on x, the space coordinate measured from the leading edge, exceeds 500,000, 5 into 10 raised to 5. Boundary layer also occurs when the flow is past a bluff body, like say flow on the outside of a cylinder or sphere or within a pipe. If this picture is taken to be curvature neglected region, you could visualize this to be spun in space around the axis, then you will generate the picture. So, at the entrance the boundary layer is very thin, but as you go towards the downstream, in the downstream direction along the length, the boundary layer thickness increases. So, in case of this cylinder or pipe, the boundary layer thickness will eventually grow up to the radius value. That means the entire region of the tube will be filled up by the boundary layer. So, that can happen in a tube flow or pipe flow. The boundary layer can grow in thickness. When the thickness equals the pipe radius, the entire flow then becomes part of the boundary layer. Okay. There is something else which is interesting about this flow past the block bodies or the curve when the convexity is facing the flow, right. You take a cylinder or sphere and then you think of the flow past it. It is here that I repeat, the particle in fluid mechanics, fluid particle is to be taken as different from molecules. Okay, don't confuse. But if you look at how these fluid particles move or the streamlines in the flow past the cylinder or sphere, you see when the flows are very slow, extremely slow, the fluid particles go parallel to the surface, faithfully follow the surface right up to the point of departure, and then the fluid continues. If the viscosity is high for viscous fluids or very slow flows, creeping flows we call, at extremely small Reynolds number, we will have the fluid particles following the surface at approximately same distance, and these fluid particles may never leave the solid surface. It goes all the way around the object and then at a point detach and then leave for the bulk. But this picture will be spoilt if you have relatively less viscosities or the flows are rapid. There you come across a situation which is the boundary layer separation. Pictorially it will mean that the streamlines will go away from the convex surface at distances closer to the entry point as the flow becomes more and more rapid, and then as the flow separates from the solid surface, the space in between becomes the region of low pressure which sucks the fluid in all directions and fairly randomly. So, that is where you have vortices and eddies, and these eddies also now start shedding, they become part of the fluid. So, they travel along with the flow. It is when the boundary layer separates from the solid object, the turbulence gets created behind the object and there is greater amount of energy consumption. This is exactly what you have to fight when you design a car or an aircraft, not to talk of a ship. It is everywhere. Therefore, we have that adjective aerodynamic shape. You make a shape such that this is boundary layer separation, and the penalty it inflicts on us in terms of greater fuel consumption, so costlier travel, that is all to be avoided, and aerodynamic shapes are therefore unnecessary. Therefore, you have the wind tunnels and all the aerodynamics are studied in wind tunnel. Same thing you have to do for ships. Okay. While we are here, I may add something which is somewhat contraintuitive. There are lots of things that we may learn from nature, and it turns out that this is a classical problem. There are certain fish which are known to generate speeds which are impossible for the power their bodies could generate if one were to take the normal surfaces. So, those extraordinary movements of velocities certain fish are able to generate, they could not be permitted if we had the normal friction factor considerations. It turns out these fish have certain structure of grooves on the surface patterns which actually reduce the drag. And this has inspired the aerospace researchers, and Russians were the first ones to mimic these surfaces on aircrafts and could achieve for the same kind of fuel economy much higher Mach numbers. So, supersonic jets have benefited from the observations in nature, and this happens again and again, and it becomes an endless guide. Nature itself is a guide to innovation, if only we are perceptive enough to learn. So, separation of boundary layer at higher flow rates will lead to the penalty in terms of greater energy expenditure. I already spoken about the concentration boundary layer. The concentration boundary layer here was represented by this Hj under the momentum boundary layer. This is the relation I was talking about. Delta C by delta U I spelled out as Schmidt to the power minus 1 by 3, or delta T by delta U will be going as Prandtl to the power minus 1 by 3. Now, let us stick to certain restrictions. Okay. We will consider the laminar flow. We will consider the mass transfer rates to be low, and if the heat transfers is also accompanying heat transfer rates are low, such that the fluid properties could be taken as constant. And let us stick to a two-dimensional picture as was shown in that diagram here. So, we just have to talk of x and z, not three-dimensional, and let us see what equations we may have to write. Coming to the conservation equations, we have for the velocity in these two dimensions, ux and uz we have to consider. Ux dou ux by dou x plus uz dou ux by dou z equal to nu, which is the momentum diffusivity or kinematic viscosity, dou 2 ux by dou x square plus dou 2 ux by dou z square. And for concentration, we have ux dou Ca by dou x plus uz dou Ca by dou z equal to dAb dou 2 Ca by dou x square plus dou 2 Ca by dou z square. Two-dimensional momentum and mass transfer. You are comfortable with this? This is clear? Okay. Likewise, for temperature, we could write ux dou T by dou x plus uz dou T by dou z equal to alpha thermal diffusivity dou 2 T by dou x square dou 2 T by dou z square. And if we have joint heat, mass and momentum transfer together, we will have to solve these equations simultaneously. Okay. Always remember, now this is again highlighting the modeling part, do not just think of equations, also think of conditions. We will have to think of the boundary conditions in this case. We have taken a steady state, so we do not have to worry about initial condition, but boundary conditions will require. And let us also think of non-dimensionalization, which I have emphasized earlier. Okay. Looking at the form of these equations, you see that there is a pattern. The structure of these equations could be identified to be 1, provided we say that these transport coefficients nu, dAb and alpha could be taken as some generic diffusivity, specific values of which will be nu, dAb or alpha, and in that generic representation the generic dependent variable will be taking up specific form of ux, Ca and T, depending on whether we are dealing with momentum, concentration or temperature. So, if we think of that, we could represent the three equations in this form, where this psi is the generic variable which becomes velocity if this chi becomes nu. If this is concentration, this has to be dAb. If this is temperature, this has to be alpha. So, the three equations, three conservation equations have this form. Then we have the free stream values, velocity u0, concentration Ca0, temperature T0. That is the free stream condition, or far away from the surface of this plate, infinite plate. And the other boundary condition has to be at the plate itself. At the plate, the velocity is 0, concentration is solubility Cai, temperature is say Ti, interface at the solid surface. And we define the three dimensionless variables as this: local value of the variable ux, Ca or T minus the value at the interface, concentration Ci, temperature Ti or velocity which is 0. Under no slip condition, velocity at the solid surface is 0. So, local velocity at any xz, local concentration at any xz, local temperature at any xz, you subtract from here the value at the interface, and then you recognize that this difference is the greatest difference. Ux minus 0 is the greatest difference that is possible at the free stream condition. This difference of local velocity, local concentration, local temperature from the interfacial values, these will be greatest when the velocity is highest, that is u0. So, the maximum value of this is u0 minus 0. So, dimensionless velocity variable will be ux minus 0 by u0 minus 0. Similarly, the concentration difference between any point and the interface, this difference is kind of driving force. Ci minus C is the driving force for mass transfer, Ti minus T is the driving force for heat transfer. Now, this driving force is greatest when the concentration is minimum, temperature is minimum, if heat is being transferred from the plate to the bulk of the fluid. So, Ca is minimum when it is Ca0. So, Ci minus Ca0 is maximum. When T is minimum T0, Ti minus T0 is maximum. So, we scale Ca minus Ci by Ca0 minus Ci and T minus Ti by T0 minus Ci. Or in terms of this, we are taking the local value of the generic variable minus the value of that variable at interface minus the difference which is obtained from the free stream value minus the interface. Okay. Now, see what happens when we look at the boundary corresponding to solid surface. Ux is 0. So, 0 minus 0 is 0. So, this value is 0. At the surface, Ca is Cai. So, Ca minus Ci is 0. So, Ca minus Ci by Ca is 0 minus Ci is 0. Same way, this is 0, this is also 0. So, at the surface, the generic variable psi is taking up value 0, and at the free stream, this is same as now numerator is same as denominator, this is also same, Ca0 minus Ci, T0 minus Ti. So, all become 1. So, our generic dependent variable under free stream conditions takes value 1 in all cases. So, 0 at the surface, 1 in the bulk of the fluid in the free stream condition, right. So, we see now two things. One, the three equations, conservation equations are identical. In the dimensionless representation, we have the boundary conditions are also identical. When you have identical equations and identical boundary conditions, solutions are obviously same. That is the genesis of all analogies we talk of later. We say that momentum transfer, heat transfer, mass transfer are all analogous. They are governed by same equations, same boundary conditions. And then we go a step further and say that while it is easiest to obtain the pressure drop data or the momentum transfer data, it is hardest to measure the concentration profiles or obtain the mass transfer data. So, can we take this shortcut of only making measurements on the easiest portion, measure only momentum transfer quantities and then infer mass transfer, because equations are same. That is the motivation for analogies. Now, it turns out that maximum amount of data are available for fluid friction factor pressure drops. Relatively less amount of information is available on heat transfer. Least amount of information is available on mass transfer because of the reasons I gave you earlier. There just can be so many of the mass transfer systems of relevance to our practice that it's impossible to study everything. So, when it is possible to make use of information on momentum transfer for heat transfer or mass transfer, that would be very, very desirable. it turns out this rosy picture is not complete. The analogies between momentum transfer on one hand and heat and mass transfer on other hand, that itself is far from complete. We can salvage under turbulent conditions also a limited analogy between heat transfer and mass transfer, not between momentum transfer and mass transfer or momentum transfer and heat transfer. Early analogies propose that and they fail. But what we can salvage, the analogies between heat and mass transfer also are of use to us. Say for instance, I were to give you a problem of measuring heat transfer coefficient from the tip of a needle to flowing air with all the sophistication you have today. In order to make a measurement on heat transfer coefficient, you would need to make measurements on temperature profile in the vicinity of that very pointed object, and temperature changes which the fluid will undergo as a result of heat transfer from that small area would also be minuscule. Comparatively, if I were to coat that tip of the needle with naphthalene and let air flow, it might be a lot easier for me to detect the change in concentration. Free stream concentration initially will be 0, and then the concentration of naphthalene which is sublime I could detect with a sensitive probe. I should be able to determine mass transfer much easier way than heat transfer here, exceptional case. And then if I have the analogy between heat and mass transfer, I should be able to infer heat transfer data. Okay. It is more often the case that we borrow information, translated information from heat transfer for mass transfer. Okay. That's how it usually works. After getting the profiles, you would need to get the fluxes for mass, heat and momentum, and then we will see that the mass transfer coefficient, heat transfer coefficient, and the corresponding momentum transfer coefficient, which happens to be f by 2 u0, these could be compared for analogy. Perhaps we can stop here for today.